I am Cedia.
I am Cedia.
I am Cedia.
This is the Cedia podcast.
The design discovery process is a little bit different. You're not dealing with a family, you're dealing with executives. So we are often interfacing with a different type of person. It could be the CEO. It could be the IT director. It could be even, I've even had jobs that are driven by the director of human resources in HR department.
Hello and welcome to another Cedia podcast. I'm Walt Zerby, and today we're joined by our co-host, Mr. Stephen Rissy. Stephen, how are you?
Doing quite well, Walt. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. And today we are also joined by two illustrious volunteers that have done a ton of things for Cedia and continue to do a ton of things for Cedia. And I'm a little partial to these guys because they're involved in standards. Standards, of course, are the coolest thing in the entire world. And I know everybody also agrees with that. So we have Eddie Shapiro with Smart Touch USA. Eddie, how are you?
Great. Doing well, Walt. Thanks for having me back.
You are welcome. And then we also have Rich Green from Rich Green Design. Rich, how are you?
Super fabulous, Walt. So happy to be here.
That is excellent. And I have these fine folks back, including Mr. Rissy, not only for him being my co-host, but for his prior experience, because this is the fourth and final part of the Resi-Mercial podcast series, where we had talked about some technology stuff in most of those other casts. But this cast is really dedicated to the business side of it. And we wanted to cover all the ins and outs of the business side. So let's just start off with some key differences and expectations for a commercial job versus a residential job. Who would like to start off with that?
How about you, Rich?
Well, okay. We use this word Resi-Mercial, which is really awkward. It sounds like a really bad breakfast cereal. I think that we always do a good job. We always listen to our customers. We always do the design process, and we always follow a rigorous process. So whether it's residential or commercial, we're always doing good work. But there is a difference. Residential work, as most of us know, is personal. It's emotional. You're dealing with the place where people sleep and where people prepare their meals and raise their families. And so the expectations are very personal. And our design work up front has to talk about lifestyle. What happens when the kids come home from work? Who is making dinner and so on, and what are their expectations of media through those activities. Whereas with commercial, you're dealing with professional people who are in an office, and the design discovery process is a little bit different. You're not dealing with a family, you're dealing with executives. So we are often interfacing with a different type of person. It could be the CEO. It could be the IT director. It could be even, I've even had jobs that are driven by the director of human resources in HR department.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you have to identify who the key stakeholders are. I guess that's where I'm going to circle back to. And we teach this in our Cedia project management courseware. Who are the key stakeholders of the project? Who are the decision makers? And how do they make decisions? And what's the reporting hierarchy? So that's a big difference in commercial. If you don't get that right, if you don't know who the decisions makers are early on, you can burn up a whole lot of time with people who have a lot of fun talking to you, but they're not able to make the decision.
Yeah, okay.
So that's one way to get started.
All right, and Stephen, I know so we usually have some pre-chats and a few emails back and forth before we do a podcast. And Stephen, I want you to talk about what you saw as a main differentiation between residential and commercial. And I thought it was succinct, and I thought it was a pretty good way of looking at it.
Yeah, when you're working, if you're going to go and do work in a commercial environment and with commercial stakeholders, oftentimes it needs to change your mindset. So when you go to talk to a client on the residential side, a lot of what you're providing, the outcomes, the goals, the reason that that client is going to make a purchase decision is because you're going to give them an outstanding experience, right? It's that personal touch that Rich is talking about, where they're experiencing something. So high performance video, right? High performance audio, making their life more convenient. It's very experiential. And those are kind of the goals that will help drive a purchase decision. On the flip side, when you're dealing with professionals, there's a very specific outcome that they're looking for, and it has much more to do with productivity and enabling collaboration with their workforce and how that's going to look when the project's done. So oftentimes they're not as worried about the experience per se when it comes to having the highest performance or those types of metrics. They're more concerned about how is this going to enable their employees to do their job better every single day that they come into their environment. So it becomes a lot about the efficiency, the uptime, the reliability of the system, the ease of use. These things are important on both sides, but you really kind of have to change your mindset and focus on outcomes differently. The one side is very experiential. The other side is going to be really kind of, data and outcome driven for what is this going to do for my employees to be better at their job.
Interesting. Eddie, did you want to chime in on that?
I did. So I think both Rich and Steve really hit the nail on the head, both in different areas. Resi is completely different than commercial. And the word ease of use is also completely different, because in the residential setting, you're always trying to sell, explain, provide the experience of ease of use. But in the commercial setting, it better be really simple, anybody being able to walk into the room. And there's always somebody new walking into the room. So training, having someone that's there that you can count on to be the person you're training so that they can hand off to anybody that walks into the room later on is so important. Because if you don't have that environment, you're going to be very busy with that client and you're going to have a frustrated client.
Okay, well, let's get into the stakeholders that are involved in these projects and how they may differ from commercial to residential. So let's focus with the internal stakeholders first. In other words, your business. What do you think? Now, this is going to come across very differently because I happen to personally know that Rich's business was set up very differently than the one that Stephen came from. A very large outfit versus kind of a smaller, and I don't mean job size, I just mean employees. So I'd be interested to hear from both of you on how you think you have to have your business set up to be successful to deal with the commercial side internally. And Stephen, I'm going to throw it to you to start off with, because you and I did discuss this and you had some stuff that I really wasn't prepared to actually to hear. It kind of surprised me.
So the commercial integration firm that I worked for, we actually had over 100 employees and we had offices in 3 different states. So it was a pretty significant operation. Now, with the job sites that we were working on, with the scope and scale of the projects that we were dealing with, we really had to have a dedicated project manager assigned to every individual project. It really was not going to work correctly if somebody was trying to project manage and simultaneously design, or trying to project manage while actually executing the installation as part of the implementation team. So we had a very dedicated staff that was purposely existed to project manage, to interface with the right people on staff at the client. So that was one thing. Having access to that dedicated resource made a very, very big difference in successful completion of these large scale projects in the commercial environments. Okay. One of the other things that the company that I worked for did is that we actually had an engineer partnered with a salesperson. So we had an engineering staff and a sales staff, but they were fundamentally partnered up so that the engineering staff would get to know the salesperson that they were working with most often, and vice versa with the salesperson knowing the engineer. And it made for really good outcomes because there was a collaboration there that was almost intuitive between the individual teams. They knew, the engineer knew basically what the salesperson was talking about when they'd say certain things to a client. The salesperson knew what to expect from the engineer, from the design side, as far as if they were going to, need to do some value engineering, or if they were able to do something that was a little more high-end performance-based or creative engineering. So it worked pretty well. And, we'd have certain accounts that were assigned to the dedicated salespeople, and then the engineer would get very familiar with those particular clients and have the ability to really know what was going on with the systems that that client had already installed, existing, things like that. So those were some, very purposeful decisions made about the staff and how it was organized to make sure that we could get projects through to completion in a timely manner and on budget.
Rich, I saw you nodding your head.
Well, yeah, when you're doing commercial work, you have to follow a rigorous process. That process can be written down. It could be 600 or 800 items long. Everybody in your company knows what to do and when to do it. And the most important work that we do is upfront, early stage, is the client discovery, design discovery. It's asking the right questions. The most valuable thing we do is to ask really good questions. Now, my company is very different from Stephen's former company. I'm a company of one person, and
that's how I said you guys are a little different.
Yeah, I have remarkably good, talented, reliable people that I contract with. We are a team. And what I've learned over the past 10 years of doing the light commercial work, when I say commercial, I'm talking about conference room systems for the most part, boardrooms, huddle rooms, private executive offices. I'm not talking about digital signage at football stadiums. That's a different kind of commercial work. That's not what a single person company should be doing.
Right.
But I can do this rather successfully because we follow a rigorous process and we have a recipe, and the recipe is for success. I am a firm believer in simplicity, in the laws of subtraction. How can we make this system as simple as it can possibly be? What are the fewest moving parts? What is the most intuitive way to come in and start a presentation or start a conference call? And if you can do that without having a big fire-breathing rack of equipment, 400 yards away in some IDF or MDF equipment room, all the better. So our designs are highly refined, extremely simple. We're relying a lot on the newer technology that you can get in automatic signal sensing and automatic source switching. And so you can really do a fairly sophisticated boardroom now with no control system. If you do it right, the automatic switching equipment that's available works. However, you got to do it right. There are pitfalls all over the place, even pitfalls with something as simple as HD-base-T conveyance of video across long-haul distances, or long-haul conveyance of USB. There's a lot of USB switching going on in conference rooms these days. That's very tricky business. You have to use best-of-breed products and then stick to your recipe. And I think that what happens is your efficiency goes way up. Your ability to deliver a positive, reliable, consistent experience for the end user goes way up. So I'm a big fan of refining your recipe.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Hey, Eddie, did you want to chime in on your company, and do you treat commercial jobs differently than residential as far as staffing, SOPs, and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I was thinking about that a little bit.
That's good.
Certainly don't have the resources that Stephen had. 100 people should be able to get a job done.
Or not.
Or not. They could trip all over themselves, right? So I kind of think it's the same either way. Maybe some would disagree, but I think you need one lead person that is working with the client lead person the whole time. The more familiar they are with that one person, the smoother the project's going to be, as long as that person is someone who's well trained in working from beginning to end and getting projects finished. So you want a lead guy or gal that can go out there and hold that client's hand, the stakeholder, the lead at the company, or the lead at the residential project, whether it's the builder, the architect, the owner's rep, or the homeowners, and make sure that they have that confidence and understanding and working relationship with your lead person. I think that's really important, and I don't think it's very different. The mechanics of the project are different and the products are different, but that process I think is the same.
All right, well, Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention how important establishing a budget is. In commercial work, these firms work with very strict budgets. They don't like to see cost overruns under any circumstances. It makes some manager look bad if there's a cost overrun. So it's really important upfront to determine where this budget is coming from. If you're working with an IT director, or if you're working with a CEO or a CFO, find out what their budget is for this project. Sometimes they have that, but they didn't tell you. So you could be designing something way beyond their means, and they'll come back and say, oh, nice proposal. What can we do for half? And that's a real problem. So on commercial jobs, budget is like a brick wall. You have to understand what that is.
Well, Rich,
That's
thanks.
Never happened before,
What was that, Eddie?
So that's never happened before. What can you do for half?
Yeah, that always happens, right? Well, Rich, thanks for that softball, because I wanted to get into the sales process. What does the sales process look like that is different from commercial to residential? And in some of our emails back and forth, something came up called bid spec. So who would like to explain what the heck that is? And I'm seeing thumbs down since you guys on that video, but it's way better to just listen. Rich just gave me 2 thumbs down on those 2 words, bid spec. So, Stephen, you want to start us off on what the heck a bid spec is?
Sure. So oftentimes what happens in the commercial world is different than the way a sales process would occur in a lot of residential situations. So with residential, it's mostly direct sales. There's a client that's interested in an experience that comes to you and wants you to, build a proposal for a particular solution. You're talking directly to the client, whether you've gone out and found them or they came to you, but you're talking to usually the person that will have some level of buying decision involved. When it comes to commercial projects, and this is especially true when it comes to certain verticals, so in government and often in higher education, there will be requirements that the stakeholder who's on staff for that company has to have a certain number of bids proposed. So what often happens is they will have existing relationships with an integrator, and they may want that integrator to just do the work for them. But in some cases, they're required to actually put out a request for proposal and get multiple bids to then evaluate against. So when they have to do that, they'll have a minimum specification. So they'll give a specification saying, here's what we need, right? That's the specification. Now give us a bid on it. Send us your proposal based on these specifications for what you would charge to do this work. So that's basically what a bid spec is. It is a posting or an RFP that just goes out to the general world in some form or fashion, or in some cases they may pick a few different people, but usually it's just posted for anybody to submit. So
how do they generally put these bids together then? That means that there's someone somewhere that has an idea that they might think they know what they want. And I'm putting all those open words in there because a little birdie's telling me that maybe their bid spec isn't exactly what they might need.
Yes. So the short answer is these companies often don't have anybody on staff that's really experienced or has the expertise to say what the specification should be. If they did have somebody on staff, they would probably just do the project internally. So what they'll do is they'll consult. So they'll bring in a consultant and they'll hire this person who will come in, put together the specification that they say this room needs to, meet these requirements. The screen size should be this. The coverage area should look like this. It should perform to this level of sound pressure level. So there's a consultant that comes in and design, puts together a specification that they then go out and get bids on. So
Okay.
that's in a nutshell, kind of how bid specs, what that means and what it looks like. And I know, Rich, you've got plenty to say about this.
Yeah, you might get a bit of a Rich rant out of me.
Rich rant. Angry guy. Excellent. Rich rant. Woo, 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 woo.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, Rich rant. I recently faced a bid spec situation, which could have been one of the largest projects I would have taken on, and I just flat out rejected it.
Oh,
It was written by a consultant, and it was for a firm that I had already done 5 major projects for across the country. We had a trusted relationship, but this company felt like they needed to get, just like Stephen explained, they needed to put out a bid spec and do their due diligence and get up some competing responses.
right.
I studied that spec, and it was extremely detailed. My sense is that an engineering team at a consulting firm wanted to prove how smart they were.
Really.
And so it was over-specified beyond a reasonable expectation.
Give us an example of what over-specified might be.
Think about a large boardroom conference table that would seat 24 people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? They specified, and boy, I don't want to upset any manufacturers here, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they specified motorized pop-up button microphones in the table. That is a design doomed to fail, because all you have to do is open up the lid of your laptop and you're already blocking the voice path from your mouth to the microphone. Somebody spills their skinny vanilla latte into the button mic, and the janitors clean it up, but it's the integrator who's going to get called out and said, "You delivered a broken microphone. Fix it for free. It's in your warranty spec." And so there are lots of ways you can fail with that kind of a specification. In today's worlds of beamforming microwaves that work brilliantly hung from a ceiling, where there's no clutter on the table, no rustling of papers, no muffling from open laptops, I don't think that a motorized pop-up button microphone makes sense anymore. But that's the kind of stuff you must respond to. When it's a bid spec, you can't deviate.
So Rich, this is a question. So, okay, this is a perfect example because you've done work with this customer before. They know you, you've done good work, and I assume the systems worked well and they were happy with them. Couldn't you have gone back and say, "Hey, I know you want to do another system. I propose that we do this instead"? Or did you feel like, do you have to, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you have to respond exactly to the bid spec that is put together to try to win the job and then try to change things around if you see it's going to be problematic? How do you handle that?
It was draconian. I wasn't allowed to speak to the client. I wasn't allowed to speak to the consultant. They wanted an absolutely fair bid across the board from all of the specifiers or from all the bidders. So we weren't able to ask questions. We weren't able to say anything. However, we were being held responsible for their mistakes. So if the consultant made an omission, it's the integrator who has to pay the price of that omission. And so it's incumbent on us, as we're writing our budget, to put a budget in for re-engineering the system that was supplied by the consultant because what they did might be wrong. But we can't ask questions up front. We just have to put that in our budget. So in commercial jobs, I want to make a very clear point here. It's very important to have a contingency in your budget. It's acceptable. If you've got a $1 million project, put a $100,000 contingency in there, or even a $200,000 contingency. And if there's a lot of unknowns in the consultant's specification that you know have to be changed, you've got to put extra time in there for your engineering to re-engineer what they did so that it's done right for the client. So it's a very dangerous area to get into because you will be held responsible for their mistakes if there are any.
Yeah, I was going to say that, what we do is very relationship based.
Yeah.
I know for Rich it is, for me it is. excuse me. And I wouldn't work like that either. I don't blame you for walking away from that. We worked for a division of Verizon for probably 5 years, handled about 60 locations, and did a lot of work. But we always had a key point person to work with. We always had a relationship, and we always had a chance to modify and work with them to make sure they were delivering the best type of system for their facility. And that's a lose from the start.
What you don't know, what you don't know. So in the bid specification, they might omit or honestly simply forget to mention something crucially important that could cost you possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars. For example, the project I was bidding on required union labor. It was never stated as such in the bid spec.
Oh,
It came up in a Q&A session in 24 hours before the bid was due. They opened it up to all the bidders on a Zoom call, and then we could ask questions. And somebody said, "Oh, is this a
Really?
union job?" And the general contractor said, "Well, yeah, you've got to estimate for union labor." None of us had done that because it wasn't in the spec. If that person hadn't asked the question and somebody got the contract, they would have been on the hook for the extra charge of union labor. Nobody would have known. That's the kind of trapping that can really get you in trouble. I think Stephen has a comment.
boy, that's good information. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah. So another example, often in commercial work, a separate subcontractor will be responsible for the conduit and the raceways. And then the integrator will come in and install their cabling. Be aware that you need to verify that in a bid spec, because there have been instances where somebody puts in their bid assuming that the raceway and the conduit and all of that is going to be installed. That was a different bid. Nope. This company expected that whoever the integrator was that was putting in the cabling was also going to be doing all of their own raceway and conduit. And that can, again, be in the tens of thousands of dollars that get spent on part of the project that was not ever budgeted for. So it's those things, the attention to detail, if you're looking at a bid spec, to be absolutely certain that you have in your mind before you ever actually put a proposal in. Because as Rich says, once you make a proposal, you're basically on the hook. And the other thing about this type of job, the reality of it is, in my personal opinion, really anybody that's interested in doing this probably should be using it as more of a lead generation tool on smaller, start with small projects, because anytime you're doing a bid spec, the likelihood is your margin is going to be pretty tight. It's not going to be a super profitable job. The reason that my company would do bid specs was to start building the relationships with certain organizations. So if they could win the bid, even if we did the project, and made just a little bit of money on it, the likelihood of us having other opportunities with that client would increase. So if the client was big enough and it was an important enough relationship, we would take the hit on a low, margin project so that we could build a relationship and then add things on like service, and support contracts and, ongoing maintenance and upgrades, and then get in and learn the stakeholders and then start to look at other projects with that company. So it was much more of a sales tool for us in building relationships than it ever really was that we were going after bid specs, because that's how we were going to build the business and make money.
Yeah, Rich, did you want to chime in on that? Because you kind of took a question out of my mouth. I was going to ask. It sounds kind of scary, all this stuff. If you're new, how the heck are you going to protect yourself against all these? Because there's so many special circumstances. So, Rich.
Well, follow Stephen's advice. Start small. Be humble. Take a few smaller jobs. Establish yourself in the marketplace and start building a reputation for being able to deliver, for being able to do what you say you're going to do. Don't bite off a gigantic project. Dollar signs cause human bias. And that's a very real phenomenon. When a young, aspiring company is presented with a $1 or $2 million bid spec, the dollar signs are going to blind them to the fine print in the contract. You've got to read every word on that document and have your lawyer look at it as well. And young, small, growing companies just tend to be blinded by the dollars. There's another way to approach projects, and this is something that we've taught in our CEDIA project management courses. It's called IPD, Integrated Project Delivery. And that is a method of doing work where there is no bid spec process. There's something that happens prior to that, and that is a qualification process. So the initial work is, who are the potential contractors, consultants, integrators who could work on this project? Let's interview them. Let's see who they are. What is their personality? How well organized are they? Are they profitable? Do they have a process? Do they have a reputation? Are they credible? Are they able to tell the truth? And do they have a dedicated project manager? Do they have an engineering department? So once you have qualified a company, then in all the different areas of the project, everyone's on the team from the start. You are on the team with the architect. You are on the team with the end user client. You are on the team with the general contractor. You're on the team with the electrical contractor. And instead of taking your plans and throwing them over the wall and hoping somebody catches it on the other side, you walk through the door and hand it to them and say, here are my plans. Let me explain it to you. Everybody in IPD, Integrated Project Delivery, has skin in the game. So there is a budget. And if everybody comes in on budget, on schedule, well, there's a bonus, and everybody is chasing after that bonus, which means there's a strong incentive to help each other. And you don't see that in competitive bid situations typically. So I'm a big fan of IPD. In residential, in our CEDIA world, we call that design build. That's right. The design build process. So design build on steroids for large commercial projects is called IPD. It's just something worth considering. And if you can find a project, if you can get interviewed by an architect who's looking for a qualified company, and if you can establish yourself as that qualified company with really good client referrals and take them to some of your job sites and say, look, this is what we do, then you're beyond the pain of the bid spec process.
Okay, Eddie.
So that may be true, the architect portion of this on the commercial side these days. But what I have found, and it's almost hit me in the head, like, smacked me in the face, is that architects on the residential side these days seem to have a lot less control and influence on who is selected for the project in our channel. Either the homeowner is bringing them along, or the builder has an AV company he really likes. But many of the architects who I know and know well seem to be having far less influence on projects on the residential side.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing to note, the difference between resi and commercial, if you will.
I was interviewed for a big residential project here in the Bay Area just yesterday morning, and I met the client. I was introduced by the lighting designer. The lighting designer was brought in by the architect, and we're all friends. We've been working with each other 25, 30 years in this market, and so the client picked up on that really fast. She goes, oh, you guys all know each other, and you all respect each other. I love the fact that we're building a team. Now, the architect didn't choose me. It was a couple steps down, but that internal referral process that only comes from maturity in the marketplace is sensational on the residential side. A little bit harder to get into on the commercial side, but it does happen.
Okay, Eddie.
Right. So looking at that, I was going to say earlier, so looping back to that, we've moved so far here. Stephen was talking about how his company was using the bid spec as a way of growing some new business. And earlier I was saying and agreeing with Rich that I don't want to take on projects where I don't have relationships. Well, it's easy to walk in and say, well, I only take on projects where I have relationships. But if you're a younger company, how do you get the relationships? You do what Stephen ended up saying. You do small bid spec to grow your, your base of clients, and you become friendlier with them, and you have that lead project person in the corporate world for that company that will bring you through to more projects.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And I had a thought come up, and obviously starting small is the best way to do this. I was thinking about deadlines and penalties. And when you win the bid, I suppose you better have the dollars available to go out and secure the gear right away, given this market of inventory levels and shipping costs and costs of goods. Can we talk a little bit about penalties that may be incurred, and might you better have a bankroll if you do win one of these bids to get your stuff in right away and have it sitting there till you're ready to use it? Who'd like to address that?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I won't start a project until I get 100% of the hardware paid up front.
Oh, okay, good.
Not the labor, but the hardware. And that's the first invoice they're going to get from me, is the hardware deposit invoice. 100% includes materials. And then what's the first thing I do after that? I buy the stuff. I don't sit on the money. We are in a crisis. It's global.
Yeah.
I ordered 14 TVs about 2.5 months ago.
Whoa.
Using this process, and I still don't have 8 of them. There is a major logistics crisis going on. It may stem from the chip shortage, but there's something else going on, that there's like a trickle-down effect from COVID, where the logistics and supply chains have gotten really sloppy and unresponsive and delayed. And it's like, where is my truck? And they won't tell me. So when it comes to cash flow, get that money up front and spend it immediately, and get that product in your warehouse so you know you've got it. Otherwise, there's a price to pay.
Eddie's hot to chime in on this one.
Yeah, so it's definitely the supply chain and the chip supply chain, both. I mean, logistics is awful right now. I ordered some AV receivers, which is not new for any of us to hear about. I'd say 6 weeks ago, and I was told 6 weeks ago that they'd arrive now. There's now another 4 to 5 week delay before I'll see them. So I ordered some more now for projects I don't even have, just to make sure I have them. And I had a client when the pandemic started who had a large project and was very concerned about supply chains and materials. And this is before the chip shortage. And he did exactly what Rich said, and I agree with, is he paid upfront for his hardware. We ordered, months and months and months in advance, and we kept his hardware in the warehouse, and that worked out really well.
I'm hoping that out of this, and then I'll get to you, Steve, that out of this COVID pandemic, we've learned that this just-in-time society, when there is a blip, it really hurts. And I'm hoping people start to carry a little bit more inventories as we slowly recover from this, because it is a mess, 100%. Steven.
Yeah, and I think a lot of general residential integrators can also relate to this, right? Where you have a long-term project potentially, and you design a system based on a particular model of whatever it is, receiver, TV, what have you. You better have the model that you spec'd on hand when you actually need to go install it. And oftentimes that means buying it the day you get the equipment payment. And that's also how our company functioned, was that we had it separated out for upfront equipment payment versus later amortization of the different labor payments and, all of those things per individual contracts. But, because the manufacturer will change their model number year over year, and it'll be 1/2 inch taller, or it'll be 2 inches, shorter, or whatever it is, but something changes. And then it doesn't fit the design that you put in place 6 months ago or a year ago. So it's the same kind of principle. You don't want to have a carpenter come in and design an entire built-in system for a TV that you can no longer fit. It's very similar kind of principle. And I'm sure a lot of guys know exactly what I'm talking about right now when it comes to making sure you get that inventory as soon as possible once the contract is signed.
Yeah, Rich, go ahead.
Interesting little anecdote. So I was sitting in a very large commercial project I'm working on with the IT director yesterday. He's kind of like my boss on the project. And he said, Rich, we need to take 3 of the rooms that you put in upstairs and turn them into conference rooms. And my CEO said, yeah, well, not the CEO, the CFO said, yeah, you probably don't want to use Rich Green this time. He's so expensive.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. And I came back and I said, you know what, Matt? I am expensive. And let me explain to you why. And I told him that we're not charging more money than other people. We're more thorough. We actually think through the whole project, bottom up, incrementally, even the cost of recycling the cardboard and throwing away the styrofoam. We cover everything, and we use best of breed products. And then I said, you know what, Matt? You know those 8 TVs that aren't here yet? Well, I bumped it up to the next model. I'm making 0 profit on those TVs just to get them here for you so you can open your office. Are you going to see an invoice from me? No, you're not. I'm not more expensive. I take care of my customers. He leaned back in his chair and he goes, that's what I needed to hear.
That's a great story. And you know what? You're lucky he shared that with you. But that's back to the relationship side
Absolutely.
of this, right?
Absolutely.
So what am I missing, guys? I think we've covered a tremendous amount of awesome information, and I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. So Eddie, go ahead.
I think you wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between residential and commercial in terms of timelines. And
Yeah.
an interesting story, in one building, which happened to be mixed use, we had the CEO's home and we had the CEO's offices. It took 3 days to do the offices and 3 years to do the house. Go figure. I don't think they were much bigger than each other, by the way, but that's a different story for another time.
All right. So any other advice that anyone might have here for those considering getting into more resi-mercial, more commercial side?
Well, I would say jump in. Commercial is a wonderful business. It's more predictable. The cash flow is more predictable. Their turnaround, to Eddie's point, is much quicker. You can
Payment's probably better too, more on time. Or is it?
The what?
Payment.
Well, the payment is guaranteed. You're under contract. And so a lot of these companies will write a purchase order to you saying, I'm going to buy this from you, which means they're legally obligated to buy it from you and pay the price. But their cash flow, their payment cycle can be long. So you might be on a 30-day, 45-day, 60-day, sometimes even a 90-day payment cycle. So you have to set an expectation about that, especially when it comes to supply chain and buying equipment. But I wouldn't run away from commercial. I think it's a wonderful way to do business. You have to be crisp and clear with your client and deliver. You always deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and then you're going to build that reputation. So
before we go to you, Eddie, I would imagine you also have to be on top of your communication skills, like answer the phone, be pretty speedy with your replies. Anybody want to address that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think it goes back to relationships. As far as I'm concerned, the show could be about relationships. It's all about communication, emails, phone calls. Had a conversation with someone today about actually calling people. It's a very millennial thing, forgive me, but they love to do texting and emailing. People sometimes need to hear your voice. That story that Rich had yesterday with Matt, I mean, that would have never happened or gone well or had the same depth had it been by email. Just wouldn't have happened. So I think it's really important.
Yeah. So one of the other considerations that I would throw out there is to make sure your documentation package is really, really, really tightened up. So whenever you're working on commercial, they will expect a documentation package at the end of the project, because most likely somebody else will be interfacing with that equipment on site. So for large organizations, they'll have a facilities manager, right? They'll have an IT team. They'll have some stakeholders that are going to be accountable potentially to some of the other individuals for immediate support when somebody walks into a conference room and needs to use it. And they have to have all of the relevant information as built when the system is done. Like I said, I worked for a really pretty large company. We had a draftsman on staff. So in order to expedite the engineering, they would actually put things together and they'd kick it over to the draftsman so that they didn't have to spend hours in AutoCAD. He could do that, do it efficiently and quickly, and then get it back to him. So for smaller companies, it's something to think about as, finding somebody that you can subcontract to or build a really good relationship with that can do that type and that level of documentation for you in an efficient way.
Okay, Eddie.
So big picture, looking at both commercial and residential, I would agree with Rich that you should definitely get into some light commercial, small projects. I think everybody in our channel, or many people in our channel, love residential because it's interesting. It's more detailed with design. The houses are gorgeous sometimes, most of the time. And so commercially, you're there for 2 days, you're doing a boardroom and you're out. Doesn't seem as interesting. A lot of people don't want to do it because it's not cool and interesting, but it's really good to round out your business, both on the cash flow side, and you never know what kind of leads you're going to get from the CFO or the CEO or those people who also have homes.
I was just going to ask that. Yeah, so that can translate to some residential business.
Right. So you're shortchanging yourself by just being 100% one or the other.
Okay. Rich.
Yeah, and back to the comment I made about putting together your recipe. When you get into setting up a conference room, whether it's a Microsoft Teams room or a Zoom room, you've got to have all the answers ahead of you before you start configuring that room, because you're going to be stopped every 3 minutes. Oh, I need an Apple ID. Okay, who owns the Apple ID? Oh, it's going to have two-factor authentication with the CEO's phone, but the CEO's on vacation right now. My engineer literally got the CEO, who was on a boat on vacation, on the phone yesterday saying, "You're probably receiving a whole bunch of Apple two-factor authentication phone calls right now. That's from me because I don't know your Apple ID. Would you please tell me?" And so where did we fail? We didn't get that in advance of the setup. There's a lot of planning to do. There's also integration with the IT department. So in a commercial job, everything we do hangs on their network. Their network is very secure. They have multiple networks, multiple VPNs, multiple SSIDs. Which SSID should we be using for the BYOD or the iPad interfaces? Which hardwired VLANs are you going to assign us? Can you give us this IP range, please? I need the following fixed IP addresses. All that needs to be set up in advance. Otherwise, your installation team is going to get stuck, and they get really upset when they don't have everything they need to do the job. So that takes tremendous planning.
Yeah. All right. Well, guess what? It happened again. We just did another CEDIA podcast, and this was a mighty fine one, I have to say. So I want to thank all of you, Rich Green Inc., Rich Green Design. Thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Walt. Thank you.
Eddie Shapiro, thank you very much. Smart Touch USA. It's always great having you on.
Likewise. Thanks, Walt.
Stephen, thank you very much for your knowledge and for being the co-host today.
Always a pleasure, Walt.
I'm Walt Zerbe. Keep an open mind.
For more information on CEDIA, visit cedia.net.